Monday morning to everybody. My name is Braxton Winston. I am one of the co-chairs for the Intergovernmental Relations Committee of Charlotte City Council. And we're here to have our October meeting. I know it's going to be a long day for City Council, so I think we'll dig right in. Why don't we just go through introductions. We'll start virtually with our committee members, then we'll throw it to Mr. Fenton in the Government Center and let him introduce everybody he has along on the call. Again, I'm Braxton Winston. I'm one of the co-chairs of the IG Committee.
And I'm Tarek Bakari, the other co-chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Thank you, co-chair Winston.
Larkin Eggleston, committee member.
Matt Newton, committee member.
Phipps, committee member.
Dana Fenton with the City Manager's Office.
Tracy Dodson with the City Manager's Office.
Nada Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
And our guest on the call.
Jess McDowell with Kilpatrick Townsend, Stockton Interstate contract lobbyist.
John Easterling with Kilpatrick Townsend and Stockton, contract lobbyist, City of Charlotte.
Hampton Billups with Kilpatrick Townsend, Stockton.
All right.
See, Dana's holding it down. All right.
All right, Mr. Fenton, why don't you take it away and give us an overview of the agenda, and then we'll get into our federal legislative update, I believe.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Winston, and good morning, everybody. We do have a pretty full agenda today. Our first item is going to be a federal legislative update and a review of the bipartisan infrastructure plan that is working its way through the Congress by our team from Holland and Knight, Rich Gold and Shauna Watley, Jeff Booth, and others are on the line. And we'll go through a very brief state legislative update, and then we'll get into proposals for the 2022 federal and state legislative agendas. So let me now turn to the federal legislative update and bipartisan infrastructure plan. Please bring that presentation up. And for this, I'm going to hand this off to Rich Gold with Holland and Knight. Rich?
Great, thanks, Dana. Appreciate having the opportunity to appear before you all today, even though virtually. Usually we're down at this time of the year to meet with all the departments and meet with you collectively or individually. To kind of go over what's going on in Washington, and obviously there's a lot going on right now. We'll try and do our best to capture that in this presentation today. So obviously we're gonna focus on the infrastructure bill in detail, but I did want to kind of set the table here a little bit because there's a lot going on beyond just that. We are in the process of the Senate and House Democrats working with the White House trying to get the budget reconciliation package together, which will be the non-infrastructure components of the president's Build Back Better program. So a lot of incentives and other structures on climate change, everything from affordable housing to childcare to the child tax credit to you name it. Just we started out at about $3.5 trillion. Negotiations are now down in the $1.5 to $2 trillion range. As you've been watching it play out in the media, obviously there's a fair amount of friction between Democratic centrists and progressives that the Hill and the White House are working through. The next 2 weeks are particularly critical. If we're going to get this done by Thanksgiving, we really need to make significant progress over the next couple of weeks to be able to move through the process. So we'll be kind of watching that and keeping you all posted. But lots and lots of potential funding there for the city that we'll want to talk more about when we start going through the agenda for the year. As importantly, sort of the nuts and bolts of things, obviously you saw the debt limit was a major issue this month. We did get a temporary resolution that will take us through early to mid-December, but that issue will come back up again in mid-December. And how the Democrats decide to resolve that remains to be seen. Minority Leader McConnell in the Senate is pushing real hard to try and force them to include it in budget reconciliation so that no Republicans would have to vote for raising the debt limit. Democrats are resisting that. They have a handful of other options in order to get there. But right now, with the focus on budget reconciliation, it will probably be a few weeks before this comes back up on the table again. And then we have government funding. We did a continuing resolution the end of September that'll take us through the first week in December. But obviously, we need to work on the federal appropriations for fiscal year 22 that started October 1st and try and conclude that as we normally do in an omnibus appropriations measure sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We should be able to get that done. We're not anticipating any major problems, but with a crowded schedule, as you can see, there's going to be a lot of effort required to bring that in a timely way. Okay, and then we've got obviously the infrastructure bill, kind of pending, but until that passes, we will need to probably do another extension of the surface transportation law, which was extended the end of September to October 31st. Once the infrastructure bill passes, that will renew that bill long term. But until the infrastructure bill passes, we'll need to do these short-term extensions. So that's probably coming up again next week. And then last two items I just want to mention. Obviously, we're very focused on police reform and voting rights. We may see the Senate bring back up its voting rights bill again this week as it returns from recess. And police reform, we had bipartisan negotiations going on with Senator Scott and a group of Democrats that looks like, at least for the time being, has been put to the side. But I think the White House is getting ready, as the president called on the Congress to do this weekend, to kind of reinvigorate those efforts again and hopefully get some bipartisan agreement there. So we'll keep you all posted, obviously, on those issues as well. With regard to the bipartisan infrastructure plan, Sean, am I handing off to Jeff here, or am I just kicking it off?
You're handing it off to Jeff.
Okay. I knew I was doing something right. Jeff, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, thanks. First of all, as Rich mentioned, the House did pass its infrastructure. Well, let me back up. The Senate added an amendment to the bill adopted in the House, H.R. 3684. So what's pending before the House right now is the Senate amendment to the House bill that's sitting at the desk waiting for Congress to act upon it. So, per what Rich said earlier, we're waiting for that action to take place. It provides $1.2 trillion worth of funding over 5 years, of which a substantial portion of it is brand new funding over and above current funding levels. So it's a significant infusion of monies that will be available, and we'll talk about the particular programs in just a minute. The bill that was put together in the Senate, the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, was a bipartisan effort led by 20 senators of both parties, working with the president and the Senate leadership. So that created a bit of a challenge on the House side as they came back with the budget reconciliation bill, because the president made a commitment to the senators that if there was a budget resolution coming forward, that it would not add any new programs in the areas that were addressed by the bipartisan bill. So House Chairman Peter DeFazio got a little bit creative in trying to create new programs in the House version of the Budget Reconciliation Act. And where it stands right now is, as I said, it's sitting at the Speaker's desk, waiting for further action. And obviously what Rich said earlier, everything's tied together. So we're waiting for action on the Budget Reconciliation Bill to move the bipartisan bill. So we'll just have to wait and see how it all progresses. Next. This gives you sort of a top line summary of the bill and where the monies are going to be allocated. And so we'll delve into a couple of those programs going forward with the rest of the presentation today. Next. Obviously, this is a program that you're quite familiar with, the Capital Investment Grants Program. And it provides substantial amount of money for the program. And no real changes in the program other than the biggest change, I guess, would be to extend or to expand sort of what is a small start up to $400 million, $150 million for each individual project. Small starts are typically funded streetcar projects, bus rapid transit, etc. But it is a substantial amount of money, and it also keeps the current cost share ratios for the program, i.e. 60% for new starts and 80% for core capacity and small starts. As you see throughout the bill, there's a huge infusion of money for low and no emission buses. And I know you just started with a pilot project for a series of low emission buses. The bill basically required transit agency going forward with the secure low and no emission buses to have an overall program for moving to a low or no emission bus fleet. And so one of the conditions that get the monies and many transit agencies to put together a plan that includes infrastructure investment as well as state and local resources to support that plan. Another new program is to offer rail vehicle replacements to allow, sort of financing of replacement parts, replacement vehicles as your vehicles age out. And so this is a new program that Congress created that'll be $300 million a year, and it'll be a competitive program, and it can involve multi-year grant agreements. Next. This is a new program, or excuse me, this is basically infra. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired day. This is basically the RAISE program for competitive programs. You're very familiar with it. It funds a range of projects. The $7.5 million would go to programs that we're already familiar with that have taken different forms of Tiger, Build, or RAISE in the past. The Infrastructure Project Assistance Program is to support highway and passenger and freight rail investments. It's a new program that would be available in forms of competitive grants that can be combined with other discretionary or formula grant programs to build projects. Next. Once again, one of the concerns that came before the Congress was the condition of bridges throughout the United States. And this is a program that would allow states to come together for individual bridges or combined bridges, sort of in a program to replace those bridges or rehab those bridges. It includes culverts, and there's also a separate program for culverts as well. So it allows you, so to the extent the city can identify some bridges that need replacement or rehabilitation, this is the program that you can secure funding for. The Healthy Streets programs are to try to deal with impervious conditions where we're trying to try to cool pavements, include more forest pavements to expand tree cover, and other way sort of reduce the climate impact of investment in roads. And then the SMART program is intended to sort of fund demonstration projects to look at the range of technologies and use of data to improve transportation efficiency and safety, sort of smart signals, et cetera, to try to improve and reduce the amount of time the cars dwell at streetlights by better coordinating signals, as well as take advantage of other technological improvements that will be taking place in the marketplace. Next. This is an expansion of a program that's been in existence for a while to eliminate highway rail grade crossings. And so this is a major infusion of money to try to eliminate highway rail grade crossings that are either blocked by trains that have caused accidents, to try to add signals, to relocate tracks or install a bridge to do a flyover over infrastructure or highway projects to avoid interactions with rail and highways. And so this is a program that's intended to sort of eliminate those crossings and put a major amount of infusion of funding to eliminate those items where there are often safety issues that exist at those infrastructures and those intersections. Next is the CRISI program that's been around for a while. This is a substantial increase in the CRISI program to leverage state and local and private investments to support safety enhancement and improvements for infrastructure for both the intercity and passenger freight railroads. So this is an existing program that's been increased by Congress. Next. Last is our Safe Streets and Roads for All. This is basically to the extent the city has a Vision Zero plan to really try to improve pedestrian safety and to look at investments in project corridors to improve safety for both cyclists and pedestrians. And so this is a major emphasis of the administration to to implement Vision Zero with the goal, as with the highway rail grade crossing program, to eliminate places where there might be accidents that have frequently occurred in the past. In terms of active transportation investment, this is to sort of encourage, planning and grants to sort of construct safe and active transportation facilities, better pedestrian crossings, what have you. And then likewise with the Stop Threats on Pedestrians program, is just to create structures to reduce the amount of injuries that happen to pedestrians, either because they're looking in the wrong direction when they cross an intersection, or just to try to stop the threats on pedestrians, to try to improve pedestrian safety as they cross intersections. Next. Just
I'll take it from here. Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. So as you all know, I'll be speaking about sustainability and resiliency. So the president has committed to deploying a national network of 500,000 charging stations in support of his broader commitment to reduce the economy-wide emissions by 50% by 2030. This legislation invests $7.5 billion to initiate the build-out of this network of chargers. So as a part of this program, there are a few new programs in the infrastructure bill. One of them being the Charging and Refueling Grant Program, which is $2.5 billion, and it's $2.5 billion over 5 years to establish an alternative fuel program as proposed in the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. The grant was set aside for community grants under the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. The program is designed to strategically deploy publicly accessible alternative fuel vehicle charging infrastructure along designated alternative fuel corridors or in certain other locations that will be accessible to all drivers of alternative fuel vehicles. The other new program, which is a part of the legislation, is another $5 billion in formula dollars to states to deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure. There's also a program called Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, which is called PROTECT. And that's $8.7 billion in competitive grants to incentivize communities to improve the resiliency of natural infrastructure such as wetlands, floodplains, and aquatic ecosystems. Next, please. There's also, to our liking, a number of programs under the airports. The legislation appropriates $25 billion over 5 years for airports. The Airport Infrastructure Grants Program has $15 billion over 5 years, $3 billion annually. Funding can be used for any passenger facility charge eligible projects, except debt service payments. The local match mirrors Airport Improvement Program. $2.48 billion annually for primary airports, which would include Charlotte. And then there's also $500 million annual for general aviation and non-primary airports. We will also see a new airport terminal competitive grant program, which is $5 billion over 5 years as well, $1 billion annually. And 55% of the grants are required to be distributed to large hub airports, which is once again good for Charlotte, 20% for small hubs, 15% for medium hubs, and 10% for non-primary airports. Eligible projects include terminal development projects and projects for relocating, reconstructing, repairing, or improving air traffic control towers and on airport rail projects. We will also see the FAA Facilities and Equipment Program, which is $5 billion over 5 years and $1 billion annually. Eligible uses for these funds include replacing terminal and air traffic control facilities, fuel storage tank replacement, electrical power system support, and hazardous material management and environmental cleanup. The TIFIA program, which we are all familiar with, is also included in the legislation, which will allow airports to access low interest loans and loan guarantees under the TIFIA program for PFC eligible projects. Next. The bill also includes water infrastructure and clean water provisions. So drinking water infrastructure resiliency and sustainability is a new program. There's $250 million in competitive grants to provide financing for resiliency projects, including conservation and supply augmentation projects, as well as clean water infrastructure resiliency and sustainability. There's $125 million in competitive grants in this category. Next. There's also 3 loan programs, the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, the Lead Service Line Replacement Revolving Loan Fund, as well as the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. And each of those, the first one will have $15 billion, the second $12 billion, and then the final one is this $15 billion in funding. There's also a new program called the Emerging Contaminations to address emerging contaminants, $10 billion in revolving loans to address PFAS contamination, essentially. And then we also have the new low-income water assistance pilot program, which directs EPA to launch pilot grant programs to address water affordability, that awards grants to develop and implement programs to assist quality households with maintaining access to drinking water and wastewater treatment. Obviously, as these programs are rolled out, once the bill is passed, we will come back again to work with Dina and others to make sure that the city is taking full advantage of all opportunities that are available through the legislation. Next, please. I will pass it over to Lisa Toffel. Thank you. Lisa, are you on? I know she was having some technical issues. I thought she had called in.
I believe she's the call-in user.
Hear me?
There she is.
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. My computer and phone have not been cooperative this morning. Great to be with you. For broadband, this is a huge federal investment in broadband and really came together on a bipartisan basis with a strong emphasis on equity and affordability for families. So you see this new affordable connectivity program providing a voucher for low-income families for internet service. We certainly saw how important that became during the pandemic. And $42 billion in formula and competitive grants for states. This is a huge amount of money. We used to talk about millions and billions. Very large number, and I think will be very helpful. Then there's also a smaller amount, but digital equity competitive grant programs for digital inclusion activities, training, equipment, public access, stuff like that. So massive infrastructure investment in broadband. For community and economic development, there's a new Reconnecting Communities pilot really focused on addressing barriers to mobility, access, or economic development, and mitigating existing transportation facilities. So this is yet another opportunity for us to address some of our transportation needs. And you can also see them opening up eligibility in terms of transportation infrastructure, finance, and innovation for economic development, residential development, related infrastructure, and public infrastructure near transportation facilities. And as we continue to build out our infrastructure plan in Charlotte, this will be very helpful also to include airport-related projects. And the last is cybersecurity. So a number of localities and private institutions across the country have been hit. And this will create a cyber response and recovery fund to assist those governments as well as private entities that have endured a cyber attack or a breach of some kind. And a new $1 billion in competitive grants for state and local governments for mitigation and trying to, develop improved cybersecurity risk and threat, including also a new section for public water systems in the Safe Water Drinking Act specifically focused on cybersecurity. So Rich opened, I'm doing the close. I think the bottom line here is that the federal government is making an enormous amount of investment in hard infrastructure through competitive grants. So we're going to have to fight for these dollars. The states will also receive some new formula funding, and we're going to need to go to Raleigh to make sure that we're getting our fair share. But local sources of revenue are needed to match these grants, so it's not just free money. We're going to need to come up with our own matching fund. And the last thing I would say, going back to what Rich said earlier, it's not law yet, but we're optimistic that it will be by the end of the year. And with that, let me turn it over to Dana for any questions that council members may have and for the rest of our team.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Rich, Jeff, Shauna, and Lisa for the presentation. And Mr. Winston, I will hand it back to you to handle any questions from council members.
Thank you very much. I don't see any hands, but if, does anybody on the committee have any questions? Mr. Phipps.
Yeah. So the discussion, the presentation we just had, this is for the part of the input. Is this for the $1.5 trillion piece, the traditional hard type infrastructure? This is what we're talking about, right? But it's more or less in limbo right now until we get some sort of compromise on the other piece, the $3.5 trillion or whatever. Is that what we're talking about right now? So this sounds like it could be some good things coming to different, our way and other states' way, but it's really contingent on getting past this impasse. Is that the message?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, basically we're pretty comfortable it's going to become law, so it's a matter of timing. So, I think it is time to start planning in terms of what the city might be interested in.
Okay, a while back I did, it probably was too early, but I did ask the various departments within Charlotte DOT and the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization if they had any projects already earmarked when these funds come available, like some shovel-ready type projects, and they responded that they really couldn't do it right now because they don't know how they're going to have to, try to apply for some of these grants and things like that. But I would think, shouldn't we be preparing a list of projects around, the area that we're wanting to put on a high priority? I mean, should we be coming up with a list, something like that?
Mr. Phipps, you raise a very good question. I'll take this one, Rich. We've talked about this a few times, and we're as a city, we're going to have to come up with some potential projects to compete for. There are a lot of, as the team is going through it, there's a lot of new competitive grant opportunities out there, and you're right, the city is going to have to develop some project ideas to compete for. And what we will see next year after, assuming, of course, that it is enacted into law, I think it will be too, after sometime before the end of the year. And next year, the federal government, the agencies will be coming out with their, with what they call notices of funding opportunities. And those notices will be coming out throughout the year. They won't be coming out all at once. And it's going to take them some time to get those notices of funding opportunities prepared. So we do have some time to get some potential projects developed here.
Mr. Fenton, I just want to, sorry, Mr. Phipps, I'll let you keep going. But just kind of, I guess I'll put it out there, since we are talking about the legislative agenda, I heard in the presentation that when some of these things that are expected to be passed come through, there's going to have to be some work on both ends, up in Raleigh and in Washington. So we'd love to kind of, as we continue to go through this conversation, any kind of suggestions or guidance that you can give us for us to consider about how we approach the legislative agenda and getting ready to to dive into these funds, I think could be helpful for us to be thinking about. Mr. Phipps, you got anything else?
Yeah, I had a question about the earlier part of the presentation when they were talking about the George Floyd Policing Reform Act or whatever it is. It's my understanding that you rightfully say that the negotiations have paused, but from my reading, I thought that the negotiations between Mr. Scott and Cory Booker are just so, the gulf is so wide that I'm wondering, is the thing kind of dead as opposed to like paused or whatever. So I know you indicated that the president has said that he's gonna try to jumpstart that thing, but they've been paused for quite a while now. I don't even know if they even, nobody's really reaching over because the gulf is so wide. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Basically, they kind of stepped away from the table about 6 weeks ago. And part of that was they had sort of drifted further apart. They were pretty close in July. And then some of the county, like the county sheriff's organization, some of the other national law enforcement organizations, which frankly have split, the police chiefs and folks like that were willing to go further, really started to put pressure on Senator Scott. So, I think they're just trying to give it a little time to see if cooler heads will prevail. I don't think police reform is gone for good here in this Congress at this point. Whether we'll get a deal or not obviously remains to be seen. But I think it's a critical issue. I think both sides feel like it's something they need to try to come to some type of agreement on. It may not be. It certainly won't be everything everybody wants. I know the wish list among Democrats is pretty long, and Republicans are pretty hesitant to do too much from the federal level. But I don't think we're dead for good in this Congress yet.
And Rich, I would just like to add to that too. I don't know if you all saw Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who's the chair of the CBC, met with the president and vice president and other senior leadership in the White House on Thursday evening of last week. And this issue was on the top priority list. So I know the CBC, which is the largest caucus in the House, is pushing forward and adding pressure, saying this is a priority. So I agree with Rich. I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon. Folks are adamant about trying to get something passed.
Thank you.
Anything else, Co-Chair Bakari? Do you have anything? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was very informative. A whole lot of information, and obviously, there's. We all hope that very soon there'll be a lot more money, a lot more resources for a lot of the city's priorities. We're going to keep growing. We got to keep. We're going to need that help coming from Washington. So, thank you all. Mr. Fenton.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. I want to thank Rich, Shauna, Jeff, and Lisa for the presentation this morning. There was an awful lot to go through, and I'll be honest with the committee is that there is more that we're going to learn about this as time goes by. And in fact, it isn't even law yet, so. All right, Mr. Chairman, the next item on our agenda is a state legislative update. And this update is very, very brief because the General Assembly has been focused really on two major issues. Next slide, please. The first issue is the state budget. There are negotiations going on right now as we speak between the House and Senate leadership and Governor Cooper. The people who are taking part in these discussions are keeping a very tight lid on information about what they're talking about or how they want to try to resolve things. So we don't have really any information to share with you at this point in time. We have been watching those policy items that were inserted by the House when they passed their budget in August, and there's really no word yet as to whether those policy items will be in or out of a final agreement. And in terms of when they're going to reach agreement, that is really still up in the air. I think we all do recognize that legislators, especially the leadership of the House and Senate, would like to try to get the session adjourned in a pretty short time frame. But right now, we just can't give you a time as to when they're going to reach agreement. The second big issue they've been working on, and this is at the bottom of the slide, pardon me for this placement here, is the House and Senate redistricting. The maps are going to have to be drawn for all 50 Senate district seats, all 120 House of Representative seats, and for the 14 congressional districts that will be incorporated for North Carolina starting in 2023. They had last month their meetings, their public meetings around the state. And for the last 2 weeks, you may have been seeing on social media people displaying potential maps. There are public terminals at the General Assembly where members can go in and draw their own maps. And frequently, some of them will take those maps and decide to show them to everybody on social media. So a few of those have gotten quite a bit of attention. But right now, the committee work is probably going to start this week on it. And potentially in the next few weeks, we could be seeing some actual proposed maps from the committee. The final thing I want to address with you, a policy issue, is the Energy Solutions for North Carolina bill that was signed by the governor last week. This is the final bipartisan effort that came together just a few weeks ago on the energy future for the state. One of the big things that the governor has touted is that it puts into law the governor's proposal to have 70% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. And also, there were some other things that he was looking for as well. And this certainly was a compromise between a lot of parties. There were some groups that were opposed to the original bill that was passed by the House, but have now come around to supporting this measure. Next slide, please. And just to give you a brief update on our legislative priorities, we're still in the same holding pattern as we were last month. Nothing has really changed here. Next slide, please. We have a couple things here that are in or out of the budget, I guess we could say. The Powell Bill and State Maintenance Assistance Program. We haven't heard anything about what may have been decided in any negotiations, of course, so we don't know whether that funding is still intact or not. And next slide, please. And I believe that's the end of that presentation, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I know there's a lot of other things that the council has been following this year, and there just hasn't been a lot of action taken on other pieces of legislation that we've been following. So this has been literally just a very, very brief report for you today. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to take any questions from the committee members now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I was muted for a second. But Mr. Phipps, I think you just put your hand down, but did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, with respect to the state budget, Mr. Fenton, I noticed you said that the information coming out of those conferences was pretty tight, but I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues here that if anybody could get the information out of those committees, it would be you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Phipps. I'll take that as a compliment, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Fenn, I do have a question, or wondering if maybe you can give us a brief kind of overview. I do know that energy bill was in the House, was in the news a lot over this past week. But are you able to kind of, briefly tell us a little bit more about how that might be of interest or affect our constituents? Also, just, is there anything that we should be kind of looking into it for? Again, I know as we deal with issues like, disruptions in transportation, this is a change in energy sources and things like that. So I know sometimes, there might be some things in energy bills that we might want to pay attention to for some of our other priorities that kind of intersect with those things. So is there anything there that we should be paying attention to?
I'll just give you a couple of observations, Mr. Winston. Is that, well, first of all, let me say that we're preparing an analysis of it right now to provide to the City Council. But what we know about it so far is that it really does support most of what the city had to say during the intervention process that took place earlier this year with the North Carolina Utilities Commission about trying to reduce greenhouse gases by 70% compared to the 2005 levels, to maintain the North Carolina Utilities Commission as the entity that would be making these decisions. I think largely it appears that it remains consistent with that. There are some things that some citizen advocacy groups are bringing up about affordability. There is still some differences of opinion out there about how much rates would go up under this bill, and so there are some concerns about low income households, whether they would be able to afford the increases or not, and that is something I think will bear watching in the future years. But if we could get that analysis finished up, we would be glad to share it with you at that appropriate time.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I don't see any other hands. Any other committee members? Ms. Bakari, anything on the state legislative update? I'd just like to say again, thank you, Mr. Fenton, for those updates that you've been giving the council every Friday. I think those are very, very helpful. They help push along conversations like these. So.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. I appreciate that. All right. I guess, Mr. Winston, if it's okay, I could switch to the last item on our meeting agenda today. And let me just say, this might be the kiss of death, but we are on schedule to finish our meeting on time today. We're at the 10:45 mark, and that's what I projected for both the federal and state legislative updates. So now we're into the last item, which is talking about state legislative agenda issues for next year. And before I get into this, let me just remind the committee that that the even year legislative sessions for both the U.S. Congress and the North Carolina General Assembly, you don't see a lot of new policy issues being introduced. In fact, this year, because of all the work that the Congress has done on the bipartisan infrastructure plan, and also probably with, I think we can say by the end of the year, the work they're going to do with the human infrastructure plan, the Build Back Better Act, that there are going to be quite a few new resources from the federal government that we can compete for. In this first part of the federal legislative request from departments is to continue working with Congress and administration to secure those resources that we identify. And we have a lot of different areas that are listed there, starting with aviation, public transportation, rail, environmental, sustainability, resiliency, cybersecurity, digital inclusion, affordable housing, workforce development, community development, and public safety. Those are all areas that are covered by those bills as we know it right now. And it also appear to be some very strategic areas for the city. And again, what we're going to have to do, as we talked about during the first presentation, the city is going to have to put together some projects to compete for and to help I think that would probably guide us in how we implement this. And also at the same time, I think this is a really good item to have in here because when we're competing for grants from the federal government, our delegation is very, very supportive of trying to write support letters, make calls to the cabinet secretaries and to the administration to support those grants. We've had really, really good luck with our delegation here, not just now, but also in the past. The second item that we're proposing to move forward on federal front is comprehensive immigration reform. And this is basically a restatement of what you've had in the legislative agenda for the last few years. Immigration reform was something that was included in the initial drafts of the Build Back Better Act. But as you all will recall from our weekly updates, is that the Senate parliamentarian ruled that immigration reform didn't really have an impact on the budget the way that it has to have an impact on the budget to be included in a budget reconciliation bill. So the Democrats in Congress are trying to look for another way to address that issue. But I believe in the meantime, it might be helpful just to continue with the current immigration reform position that you've had for the past few years. It'd be great if they're able to find something to get it included in reconciliation, but as of right now, it doesn't look very good. And those are the only two items that we're proposing for the federal legislative agenda for 2022. And there's also two items that we're proposing for the state legislative agenda for 22. The first is mobility. This would be the same as your 2021 legislative agenda position on mobility. As we have reported previously, city staff is still working with stakeholders to build support for mobility issues, and we'd like to continue that in 2022. And the second one is another one. This is very similar to the federal position on infrastructure and community needs, and that is the state is going to receive quite a bit in formula funding from those, both the bipartisan and the Build Back Better Act. And they will have that funding to distribute. So again, a parallel position to the federal position. And I think that probably in 22, most of the work on this with the state would be done through the governor's office. I believe Mr. Phipps had a question in the bipartisan plan that I answered to say that it's going to take the federal agencies a while to get their notices of funding opportunities drafted and get them out on the street. Well, the same exists for the state. That's also the state agencies. They have to wait for the directives to come from the federal agencies before they receive the formula funding. So I think in 22, most of the work in this area would be done with the governor's office. But there may be a need at some point, too, to try to get the General Assembly to make some resource decisions. We'll just have to wait to see just what those different decisions would have to be. And the next slide, Mr. Chairman, we have the next step slide. We usually put this in every presentation. We would be asking today for the committee to recommend the proposed federal and state agendas as presented to the City Council. And we would take them first to the strategy session of the council on November 2nd, where you and Mr. Bakari would lead the council in discussion of the recommended agendas, followed by an action review item the following week on November 9th, and then look for approval at the November 22nd business meeting. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to close out, and we'll hand it back to you, sir, in case there's any questions from committee members.
I see Mr. Phipps, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, with respect to the comprehensive immigration proposal of our agenda, that's been such a contentious issue for a long time. Do you foresee this carve out of the HB1 features as having the potential to advance, even if the overall global comprehensive immigration bill is, still out there? Do you think that this piece could move apart from that, or it would still have to be blended and included with the overall global comprehensive immigration reform bill?
Mr. Phipps, that's a great question that I can't answer right now. I could do some more work on this to get you and the committee members a more cogent answer. But right now, I'm not really sure just how to answer your question.
Any other questions or comments from other committee members?
Yeah, Co-Chair.
Yeah.
So I think, Dana, you did a good job crafting the buckets that matter, right? Part of me, having done this now for a number of years, knows that having a big general bucket that then, as we progress month over month and things become more clear, we kind of enhance and evolve our talking points. Makes a lot of sense. I get that. On the other hand, I'm wondering, these are very vague, and I bet you there's a couple things in there that we don't even know what our specific ask or angle is around mobility and things like that we really should, particularly given where the most money in history of the world is about to be doled out and things like that. So I just make that as a side comment. I don't think that's enough to stop us at this point, but I think we need to really go and sharpen the pencil within some of these topics of like, where are we going to be opportunistic? I think it's just more of a takeaway piece of guidance than a critique on something that served us well for years and an approach at a high level. It's just, we need to do something, I think, a little more tailored.
So I agree with Mr. Bakari. I also think that this is where we come in. So I was a little bit surprised just now with the request for action, well, partly because I feel like we haven't necessarily given our input yet. But again, from a council member point of view, we have had opportunities. It's something Mr. Bakari and I have been asking for folks to do. So let's do it. A couple of things that I to Mr. Bakari's point, there's some specific things I'd like to explore. Definitely want to find a place for some of those legacy items that Mr. Fenton went to, and I love for council to consider how to go about doing those things or keeping them in front of our legislators. But for instance, as Mr. Bakari said, I'm thinking about procurement reform. We're about to deal with amazing amounts of investments potentially in transportation and other infrastructure spends. Mr. Eggleston will often mention how we have to do things different with some of those infrastructure and transportation projects and the delays, particularly around Hawthorne Bridge and other things around the Blue Line. Some of that, we find ourselves handcuffed by the old rules that don't allow us to be as nimble in dealing with some of those issues. So, as we potentially are about to see billions of dollars infused into some of those things, would that not be something smart to start thinking about agitating for now? Because I know that's something that all of council over the years has talked about. Thinking about from an affordable housing perspective, is there more kind of focused ask or angle that we can explore with it? Been talking to the folks over at Rebic, and the real estate industry is really interested in finding ways to expand the staying in place programs that we have championed, and just thinking about where we are again in passing the comprehensive 2040 plan and some of the tools that we need. That's something that gets support across the spectrum of political kind of circles and other demographic groups. So I'd love to see if we can kind of hone in on that staying in place legislation. Say it again.
I was to say, Coach, I had a recommendation, but let me let you finish your list there, and then I'll tell you what it is.
I've got one more thing. We always look, to how do we support our emergency service folks, especially our firefighters, because we have a unique kind of situation with Charlotte firefighters in terms of the way they're dealt with. Expansion of cancer coverages, especially after folks retire. If folks don't know that profession, a lot of times people will start popping up with these odd cancers that don't really match their demographics. And the way our existing coverage looks at it, it doesn't look at certain things as workplace instigated illnesses. And that puts a lot of our firefighters in bad situations when they're getting these very acute cancers. Folks might be more familiar with the response, the kind of fight for these coverages after 9/11, when people were popping up with these odd cancers that really could not be come from anywhere else but their interactions with these strange burning materials. So that's something that our folks have been adamant about, and I think that's something that we should explore. So again, 4 things: legacy items, expansions of staying in place legislation, expanded firefighter cancer coverage, and procurement reform.
So, Co-Chair, you tell me if you think this is a decent approach, and then we'll let the committee weigh in, because we have a two-sided coin of a problem here. On one side, we know there's more work we want to do. There's more specificity and things we want to include. On the other side, we've been asking for a while. We haven't exactly gotten the feedback needed, and we're on a timeline. So what if we moved as Mr. Fenton has asked on the motion today, where we bring forth what he has drafted at this macro level to the November 2nd strategy session. But in parallel, you don't just wait till November 9th and have staff kind of between now and then gather and present. We also ask maybe the mayor to refer to every committee, so that every committee and every staff member now looks at this and says 2 things or 3 things. 1, is there a problem with anything you see here? 2, within the scope of what they focus on in the committee, but even more broadly as individual council members, are there tactical things that we would add right underneath them? And 3, are there tactical pieces that roll up to something that's not covered here where we need another add? I'm sure we'll find 1 or 2 from the staff process as we get that in. So this way we're moving the ball forward. Maybe we're scaring some of our colleagues of like, oh, this has already been referred out. So now, now's the time to focus and give us the feedback. And then ultimately we're engaging staff alongside council members to brainstorm certain projects, certain things, because I think, we've done this for what is this, our 4th, 5th year of doing this at this point. And I'll tell you, mobility, infrastructure, and community needs, these things with the descriptions, I view these more as strategic objectives, right? I think underneath them, there have to be a list of tactical initiatives that then once you check those boxes, we've achieved the strategic objective. Not kind of vaguely, we presented it and congratulations, or they did something. So I think that might be a nice compromise between knowing we still have work we want to do, but knowing we're on a bit of a timeline that Mr. Fenton has brought forward. Does that make sense?
I agree with that. That's kind of how we went about it last year, and I track with it, and I support that.
Others or anybody else against that?
I think Mr. Eggleston has his hands up, so I'll let him chime in.
Yeah, just all on the same page with both of you in terms of around the specificity. So whether or not we vote to move this forward or not, I could go either way, but I certainly do affirm, and imagine we all affirm, that we've got the right broad subject matter in this, but that there's, I guess I was a little surprised as well to see the request for action on this broad of just like, these are our overarching buckets topic wise, but fine with either direction we go.
Well, it's up to us. So, I mean, Mr. Bakari, do you want to put a motion on the floor? A way to.
Yeah. Why don't I make a motion? I move that the committee recommend to City Council the proposed 2022 federal and state legislative agendas as presented as the strategic objectives with additional tactical initiative detail and staff inputs to come between now and November 9th. It's a little longer than I thought it would be.
No, that was actually very good. The only concern I would have before I second it would be to ask Mr. Fenton about the date, because it's November 2nd, our strategy session. Because I want to give staff has been working, and we have not brought. City Council has just not brought ideas forward yet. So I want to be respectful to the ability to give them an opportunity to turn those things around. So, Mr. Fenton.
And Co-Chair, that's one of the reasons I thought of the committee approach, because then it's staff pushing on council members in topical areas, at least, and people can go outside of that, but that way there'll be a little teeth.
I would second that motion. Then I would ask for us to follow up exactly like you said, to ask for a recommendation, ask the man for recommendations to those committees. But I just want to give Mr. Fenton's kind of input on that timing.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. First, let me say that going back to what Mr. Bakari said several minutes ago, he used the three words sharpen the pencil in terms of getting potential projects, and I like that phrase, sharpen the pencil. So let me just say that we are in the sharpen the pencil mode right now. And in terms of the date of November 9th to come back with tactical, sub-strategic tactical goals, that may be way too soon because, again, we're probably not going to see the legislation passed before November 9th. But also, there's going to be sharpening the pencil, so to speak, on these things as time goes by next year, even after the legislation is enacted, and once the agencies have their say in how they phrase these opportunities in the notices of funding opportunities and so forth. So that sharpening the pencil is going to be an ongoing process, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't think we'd be able to come back with any sort of complete tactical ideas on November 9th.
Okay, so what I heard is we're in a process of a very slow Boy Scout sharpening of the pencil with a little whittling knife. And so what Mr. Bakari said is actually right in that we have time. So getting this in front of council and on November 9th and asking for that feedback to come back from our colleagues on November 9th is right in kind of the timeline of the process. It's good.
And let me ask it a specific way, Mr. Fenton. When are we planning on doing the state session, the state joint legislative session that we do each year, where we bring forth, and because that's probably the date. I mean, that is the date where this can evolve all throughout next year. But when are you planning that?
Yeah, with the state legislature, we're projecting they're going to go into session early to mid-May. And so we have targeted anywhere between the beginning of January and the end of April to meet with our delegation. And also, if I could say this too, is that I think this would be a really good subject to talk about at the next committee meeting on November 15th. I just wanted to get that in there too.
Well, I mean, I agreed. I think so you don't have as much pressure as we need. Here's my concern. My concern is usually when we kind of do this, whatever we approve, if people weren't paying attention before, they're certainly not paying attention after, because we've checked the box and we've moved on. So I just want to make sure we really kind of impactfully state to our colleagues, right now is the time to do some initial work. Mm-hmm. We might refine that and stuff like that, in January and February. Like, this is it to give us the head start to really get it there. So I'm a big fan of the motion we just made, paired with the fact that we're going to send that message. And then among other things, we're going to work with the committee staff leads and the committees to really get them to start thinking about and providing us some input.
So I'll second Mr. Bakari's motion.
All in favor?
Yeah, well, so we'll go through any other further discussion on the matter.
Anything that pushes the process forward, I'm for. So I'm in support.
Okay, so we'll do the roll call vote. Mr. Winston is a yes. Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
All right, that vote is unanimous.
Is that a judge? We have a judge here?
So, Mr. Fenton, I hope that that guidance was clear. That motion was clear.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Thank you, committee, for that vote, and look forward to continuing these discussions in November and actually afterwards too, because I think we're going to be talking about these very issues for several months.
All right, thank you very much. I think that's the end of the agenda. Does anybody have anything else for the good of the order? If not, I'll see y'all in a little bit, right? Motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
Aye.
Yes.
All right.